Andrew Whitelaw from Thomas Elder Markets. Great to have you again with us on Flow.
Thanks, Ricky. Thanks for having us along.
Look, we're sitting on what looks like a bumper crop. Maybe things are a bit wobbly in Western Australia after the frost, but for our listening audiences, things are looking pretty good. How is it looking from your perspective?
Look, touch wood, fingers crossed we'll have a decent crop overall in Australia. Still quite a way to go. Still a couple of months before we get it in the bin. Still plenty of challenges. Like you said, that frost in Western Australia, we could do with another couple of rains in South Australia. But by and large, if we look at Australia as a whole, it is looking pretty good.
Okay, and so on the prices front, just generally speaking across, say, wheat, barley, canola even as well. I mean, canola is sort of a standout on pricing, but how are things holding up on those fronts?
Look, canola is still doing remarkably well. We had a little bit of a, in some port zones, we had a bit of a fallback early on this week, but largely still very strong. Canada's not going to be any more canola coming out of Canada from this point on. And wheat prices, look, they've lost some strength from the real highs in mid-August, but still, historically speaking, we're still looking at good pricing. So not really much to complain about on the pricing front. We just got to get it grown, get it in the silo, and then it should be all good.
Now, as we know, you keep an eye on these international markets very closely. We know that supply around the world is a big issue. What are you're thinking that maybe there could be some issues with supply or the clarity about what's actually out there in the market?
Look. What is interesting at the moment is the world, funnily enough, on paper, is sitting on extremely large stockpiles of wheat. If you look at the global picture, we're actually sitting on the fourth largest stocks of wheat that we've ever had in history. However, as an analyst, it's always important to delve into those numbers. And one of the things that we've got with those numbers is that if we actually look at who is holding most of the grain, 60% of the world's wheat is held within India and China. So there's only 40% of the world's wheat that is in the other, 180 odd countries.
And what does that mean if it's held by India and China? Does it mean it's not really in circulation, it's in a stockpile?
Look, India is what we call a sometimes exporter. They sometimes export, but not all the time. You could probably consider China to be a never exporter. They haven't really exported anything of any sort of volume for a long time. So that means it's not really available for the market. So when we start looking at, well, what has the rest of the world got in terms of stocks? And it starts getting a bit tighter, a bit less available stocks. So if we look at things like the availability of, what we call like the top 8 exporters, we're really talking back to levels not seen since, 2007.
Right. So does that mean that it is a bit of a tighter supply situation? There could be some upside on prices then?
Not necessarily. That's most likely be factored into the market at the moment. But it just means that if any issues happen, any further issues around the world in the next 2 years, then the fireworks, could go off. The stage is set, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't know if you're referencing the UN and the Secretary General who gave China and US a bit of a telling off and saying, look, cool it guys, we don't want another Cold War, and they both showed up at the UN saying, no, we're not going to have a Cold War. I guess if there are regional tensions, then suddenly the price of those sorts of commodities starts going up.
Well, that's correct, yeah. Well, there's so many influences on the grain market from supply and demand, but also geopolitics.
Now, on the canola side, with those prices, when it comes to, I guess, biofuels and the mandates from the North American governments, is that going to be a driver? I mean, are they going to be able to meet that demand going forward?
Look, it's been one of the biggest drivers for the last 15 years is biodiesel and biofuels and these sort of mandates. And that doesn't look like, that's not really going to go away for probably another, I don't know, until we see electric cars really take off. There's still going to be huge demand for biodiesel and biofuels. So whenever they change the mandates for that has a big influence on, the price of things like, especially corn, but soybeans, and obviously the flow-on effect to canola.
Andrew, you're monitoring the markets closely. That's what you do at Thomas Elder Markets. For farmers, it can all be a bit mystifying with all these different factors there, but I understand you've put some work into a resource for South Australian farmers.
Yeah, so we worked, in the early part of the year, we worked with GPSA, Grain Producers South Australia, to sort of start to try and demystify the markets so much. In our view, we don't think the markets are actually that complicated once you start to sort of work out what are the things you need to know. There's a lot of things happening in the markets. You don't need to know everything in depth, and you just need to know the key things that will drive the market. So we worked with GPSA as part of the Beyond the Silo program. And the purpose of it was we did a whole bunch of workshops right throughout South Australia, which were, in between lockdowns in Victoria. And we also produced a booklet. And the idea of the booklet is it's a document which will, helps you understand why the market moves. What are the big things that move the marketplace? And we picked a few sort of case studies of things that have happened in recent times, like the barley ban into China, the Russian export taxes, and how they influence marketplaces. So the idea is that we don't think the markets are that complicated. We want to create simple markets and simple market information that farmers can use to make more informed decisions. And if they make more informed decisions, they'll hopefully be able to make improved decisions because they have a little bit more knowledge. And it's not just one side of the marketplace that has the knowledge. We want farmers to have equal access to information on the market.
Yeah, I think about historically, could there be a bit of a generational hangover from the single desk days where farmers probably didn't think about or track these things more closely, but the younger generation are willing to dip their toe in those waters and track it?
Look, I actually, from my experience, I think there's an equal number of young people who sort of wish they had the single desk so they could concentrate on other things. But also there's an older generation who are very, as much opposed to the single desk and get on with the way the market is. Look, the single desk had its advantages. It allowed farmers to just, sell the grain to really one exporter and that was it. It has its disadvantages as well, but the reality is that is what it is. The market's changed. The single desk is, I'll put $100 on it that the single desk will never come back.
Oh, I don't think it'll ever come back, no. But it's an interesting situation. The National Farmers Federation have commented recently about their concern at the UN. The big meetings are happening at the moment at the Security Council level, but they're concerned that the UN food program, talking about food systems around the world, isn't paying enough attention to the trade side of food supply. I guess they're saying there are smarter and more efficient farmers around the world that need to be able to get their product to places rather than whatever the UN Food Organisation's focusing on.
Look, I'll be honest, I haven't read that, I haven't looked into it, but I think what we need to do is we need to remove the barriers to trade. The less barriers to trade, the more we can move our product around profitably for our farmers, which is priority number one. Priority number two is that the less barriers there are, the more access the people of the world have to food. And the more access that people have to food, the less starvation, the less malnourishment around the world. Look, we're seeing issues in Afghanistan already because of the takeover by the Taliban government.
Yeah, I think their point that they were making is also those things you've just referenced, but also that, I guess, say Australian farmers are producing food with lesser inputs and maybe with less of a footprint on the carbon side, for instance, than maybe farmers in other part of the world. They weren't throwing specific rocks at specific farmers, but just saying we're more efficient at it, and that's going to help, global food supply.
Well, absolutely, yeah. Like the more efficient we are, if we look at things like our water use efficiency, we get more grain per millimetre of water than I think anywhere else in the world, commercially, and we do it without any handouts or minimal handouts in terms of government support compared to the rest of the world. So that should be lauded. That should be, the world, the world sort of environment, the UN and food programs and governments around the world should be looking at Australia and saying we should be following in their example in a wide number of ranges, from our grain production to our animal welfare standards.
Absolutely, and I think that really comes back to that resource that you're talking about, putting in the hands of South Australian growers, but I think it's going to be something useful going forward, is that we can demystify the market for farmers, because Australians already are well aware of a lot of the market factors and very good farmers.
Exactly, 100%. And this just gives us, our farmers are fantastic when it comes to production. We are some of the best producers in the world. Like I said, with water use efficiency, etc., the technology we use. And that's one of the things that we've concentrated on is production. But when it comes to markets, I'll be honest, I've spoke to thousands of farmers about grain markets. It's not the thing that is the most exciting for them. I love markets. I find markets to be fascinating and exciting. But the majority of farmers who would say, out of my top 10 activities on farm, marketing grain and grain markets is number one, I would say that they will be few and far between. And what we're trying to do is just make it easier so you don't have to spend too much time looking at markets. You just spend enough to know what is happening.
Yeah, that's good. And putting those resources in people's hands is very helpful. Andrew Whitelaw from Thomas Elder Markets, thanks for your work there and thanks for the chat again. Always appreciated.
Anytime, Ricky. We're always here for you.